Hello, welcome to the KE Learning DIY Organizational Design course, where we will be taking you through a blueprint of how an organization can effectively chart its own path by designing and managing the execution of its own organizational design in order to position itself for success in the ever-changing, technologically evolving business landscape. This approach offers an antidote of sorts to mitigate against situations where there's a huge disconnect between an organizational design output produced by a party external to the organization and the execution that often has to be undertaken by the organization. You essentially have a process that starts with external parties who have limited information about the wavelength at which the organization's heart and pulse beat, collecting information from parties internal to the organization who intimately know how the organization's pulse beats in the best and worst of times, providing and positioning this information according to their own judgment and discretion. This process often ends with the external party using that information to produce an outcome, the shape of which is at their own discretion, that they hope will best move the organization forward. The execution of the output to this process often leads to an outcome that neither party envisaged by any measure. The external party walks away with pockets full, and the organization, in a lot of cases, often ends up with their faces buried in palms, wondering, what in the world did we just do? It's not all doom and gloom. External parties often bring a different perspective and an outsider's view to the process, which can be quite valuable in the context of organizational design. However, what can't be ignored is that they are also the only way in which an organization with highly skilled and competent people can find itself paying through the nose for a technology specialist whose only core skill and experience is teenage trauma counseling. As such, using internal capability to DIY an organization's future shape and makeup presents a viable alternative, all things considered. Before we start, let's align on a few definitions so as to move forward with the same understanding. So, what is organizational design? Well, it's essentially a critical process that involves structuring an organization's resources, roles, and processes to effectively achieve its strategic goals. This process is not only about creating an efficient structure, but also about ensuring that the organization is adaptable, collaborative, and aligned with its mission. In this course, we'll take you through how to effectively use internal resources and capability to engineer a data-driven organizational design that eventually, after completion, should be able to ingest all sorts of inputs, such as qualitative and quantitative data, and optimally guide the organization in maneuvering and adapting to changing conditions in order to sustain and thrive in the ever-evolving and challenging business landscape. We'll start by going through a model of what we view to be the face of a data-driven organization in simple terms, from which we'll build a framework of sorts on how to approach organizational design with the end game of becoming a future-ready, data-driven organization. We will then get into a case study that will deeply interrogate in order to set the scene for a demonstration of our data-driven organizational design approach. We'll use the case study to unpack the design and planning process of the data-driven organizational design and conclude with demonstrating the execution of the given design using the given plan. Let's get into it. Right. So if you've encountered our analytics translation course, you would have come across a version of the model we are about to describe here, which outlines the elements to consider organizationally when working towards building a data-driven organization. The whole point of an organizational design intervention is to get the organization in the right shape to be able to execute on its corporate strategy. Hence, the corporate strategy is the starting point and effectively the foundation from which the end game new organizational design will be realized. Flowing from the overall organizational strategy is an interpretation of the role that each function and subfunction within the organization will need to play in order to deliver their contribution in executing the corporate strategy. So that's the starting point. We therefore need to outline each function and subfunction in order to be able to extract the strategy execution mandate of each function and subfunction towards achieving the overall strategy. So essentially, the contribution of each subfunction builds up to the contribution of the overall function, which then, along with other functions, builds up towards achieving the overall organizational strategy. Each organization will follow a variation of this function and subfunction breakdown with some differences depending on the nature of the industry and the posture of the organization, such as whether the organizational business model is business to business, i.e., B2B, business to consumer, i.e., B2C, or B2B to C, and so on. We'll demonstrate how to factor in the various nuances of the business type into this data-driven model when we unpack the case study later on in the course. The functions we're going to cover include customer operations and management, marketing and product, finance, human capital management, technology, as well as business operations.